Today is a joyous day, not only because it is Reformation Sunday. For us theology nerds and Lutheran nerds, we get really excited, but also because we just gave 5 Bibles to 3rd through 6th graders. It's amazing. Thank you all for all your contributions in making that happen. Do you remember when you received your first Bible? Or your first child's Bible storybook? I don't really remember when I received them. I just remember always having this large tannish children's Bible. And then at some point, a Good News Bible came my way. But what I do have a vivid memory of is one of those golden books, you know, with the gold binding. Some of you remember those? And it was of a children's version of the Christmas story. And that was my absolute favorite Bible story as a child, and my favorite Christmas story. But I wanted to hear it all the time. And I don't know if it was the beautiful illustrations or the way it was written, but every night, year-round, not just at Christmas time, I wanted to hear that story of Jesus coming to us. And then I somehow got this idea in my head that I was going to make the beautiful illustrations even more beautiful. And alone in my room with the door closed and a box of crayons, I went to work. When I finished, I looked at what I had done, and I was horrified. I had ruined my favorite book. My artwork did not match up to the artwork that was there already. It was awful. And I was going to be in so much trouble. And so that night, and so many bedtimes after, when my parents asked me if I wanted to have them read to me from my favorite book, I said, no, that's not my favorite book anymore. And I pulled out another. But the truth was that I was ashamed and afraid. Occasionally when I was alone, I would pull that book out of its hiding place, and I would tear up when I would look at the destruction I had caused. Well, about 9 or 10 years ago, when I first became a mother, I got this box that had been saved of a bunch of my childhood books so that I could use them with my children. And I was unpacking it, and I pulled out that book. When I held it in my hands, it was like a flashback. My anxiety level grew, my blood pressure went up, I had a knot in my stomach, all over again. Wanted to make sure no one was looking. And I decided I needed to assess the damage to see if I could still use this book with my children. Was it going to be possible? And so reluctantly, I opened the pages, waiting to see all of the mess I had made. Waiting, this was the right book, right? It was. There on the last page, not even over the illustration, but over words, was just a little bit of crayon scribble. I had overblown this destruction so much. I had exaggerated in my mind all the destruction I had caused. I felt this wave of relief. It wasn't nearly as bad as I had imagined. And it was almost laughable. This freedom I could feel now, if it wasn't so sad. That for so many years I had prevented myself from hearing my favorite child storybook of Jesus because of a little scribble. You know, if I had just taken the book to my mother, she would have spoken to me about consequences. But then she would have forgiven me. And maybe even been able to erase some of the crayon. And I would have been able to hear that story as often as I wanted to. And I wonder, how many of us are like that? Maybe not carrying the burden of guilt from a little crayon graffiti, but how many of us feel like we are enslaved to what we have done and what we have left undone in our past? Whether it was 30 years ago or 30 minutes ago, and we feel unforgivable. So 499 years ago, this German monk was really frustrated with people being taught that they were unforgivable. And he was really frustrated with Jesus' words being twisted to be only law and judgment and condemnation, and leaving out the love and forgiveness and grace. And so he made a list of his top 95 frustrations. And tradition and legend has it that he nailed this list to the Castle Church door in Wittenberg, which is where you posted things you wanted to discuss. Or it's possible that maybe he just sent it off to some of his superiors on October 31st, 1517. But either way, these 95 frustrations caused a domino effect and changed the world. Later on, while Martin Luther was hiding out of fear for his life, he did something else that was scandalous and dangerous. He translated the New Testament and then later the Old Testament from the Latin, which only the most wealthy and educated top 1%ers who could get their hands on a Bible could read. And he translated it into the common, everyday German language. This hadn't been done before. Suddenly, regular people like you and me were free to hear Jesus' words in our own language. Suddenly, we were free to hold Scripture in our own hands and interpret and find the grace for ourselves. In John's Gospel, we are directed to know Jesus so that we can know God. Today we hear from John's Gospel, Jesus assuring us that we don't need to hide our past from God. Not that we could anyway. We don't need to live as slaves to sin or fear punishments or be too ashamed to come to church or to admit that we crave Jesus' presence in our lives because we don't think that we deserve it. Because we don't. Because none of us do. But still, Jesus came to us and for us and has made us worthy. John shares this radical good news of Jesus telling us that we are free. Free to worship. Free to sing the gospel in hymns. Free to try and fail. And free to be who God has created and called us to be as children of God. Because of the Reformation, we have this Lutheran tradition that we are free to promote equality for all, against racism, against classism, against sexism, against violence, or any other sort of injustice or oppression. We as Lutherans have a tradition where we are free to promote spiritual health for all, with radical inclusivity and hospitality in the sacraments. We have a tradition where we are free to promote welfare for all and education for all. And we are free to place the scripture, the Jesus stories, in the hands of children. And then to hand them this permanent highlighter marker so that they can mark up the Bible and enhance all the places where they find themselves in the story and where the story speaks to them and where they hear Jesus telling them that Jesus has come for them and loves them no matter what and has made them free too. Amen.